Last week, my mother-in-law looked straight at my son and said he didn't belong at the family wedding because he would ruin the photos. So I smiled, finished organizing the entire $70,000 wedding budget she trusted me with, and quietly moved every dollar out of the account the night before the ceremony. And the next morning, while she was screaming at the caterers in a ballroom full of guests, wondering why the food hadn't arrived yet, I was sitting by a hotel pool in Orlando with my 9-year-old son, finally realizing that sometimes the quietest revenge says the most. Chapter 1. The wedding my son was never meant to attend. Naperville, Illinois is the kind of place where everything is supposed to look perfect. The lawns are trimmed to the same height, the houses sit evenly along quiet streets lined with maple trees. On Saturday mornings, families walk to the farmers market downtown while their kids ride scooters along the Riverwalk. It's the kind of suburb where people wave politely when they pass you, even if they barely know your name. From the outside, my life probably looked exactly like that. Neat, stable, predictable. I'm Marina Hale. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 8 years, I've worked as a financial operations consultant, mostly freelance, mostly from home. Small businesses hire me when their books are a mess. I organize budgets, track contracts, set up payment systems, the kind of behind-the-scenes work nobody notices until something goes wrong. I started doing it in 2016 after Hazel was born. At first, it was just a few projects here and there while he napped in a playpen next to my desk. Over time, it turned into a steady career. These days, I manage financial operations for 3 small companies at once, and most of my work happens quietly from my laptop at the kitchen table. Because of that, in my husband's family, I somehow became the unofficial person who handled anything involving numbers: taxes, contracts, vendor payments, wedding deposits, especially wedding deposits. My husband, Elliot Grant, works as a project manager for a logistics company out in Aurora. He's 38, practical, organized, the kind of man who can manage a team of 50 warehouse employees, but somehow still forgets where we keep the extra batteries at home. We've been married for years, long enough that our routines run on autopilot. Coffee at 6:30, Hazel's school drop-off by 8, Elliot heading to the office while I open my laptop and start answering emails. Our son Hazel is 9 now, 4th grade at Meadow Ridge Elementary. Tall for his age, skinny knees, always leaving Lego pieces on the living room rug like little landmines waiting for my bare feet. Most mornings he comes downstairs with his hair sticking up in 3 directions and asks if we have waffles. If you drove past our house at that moment, you would probably think we were one of those families that had everything figured out. But families don't fall apart in public. They fall apart in quiet moments that nobody else sees. For me, most of those moments had one thing in common: my mother-in-law. Evelyn Grant is 63 and still carries herself like she's hosting a room full of important guests. Years ago, she owned a boutique wedding decor business that was surprisingly successful around DuPage County. She built entire wedding aesthetics from scratch: floral palettes, table settings, lighting designs, the works. Even after selling the business, she never really stopped seeing the world that way. Everything had to match, everything had to look right, especially family. Evelyn rarely raised her voice, that wasn't her style. Instead, she specialized in comments that sounded polite on the surface but landed like tiny cuts under the skin. The first time I noticed it clearly was during a family photo a few years ago. We were standing in the backyard of her house after Thanksgiving dinner. Elliot's sister Natalie had set up her camera on a tripod. Everyone was shuffling around trying to fit into the frame. Hazel was 7 then. He ran over and stood next to Elliot, smiling with the same big grin he always has when he knows a camera's pointed at him. Evelyn tilted her head and studied the frame. Then she said gently that maybe Hazel should step a little toward the edge because children sometimes throw off the balance of a photograph. Not mean, not technically, but the way she said it made Hazel look down at his shoes before moving. Another time, during Natalie's engagement party last spring, Evelyn glanced at the bright blue shirt Hazel was wearing and said that lighter colors tend to pull attention away from formal outfits. Again, soft voice, polite smile. After a while, you start to wonder if you're imagining things. Natalie, Elliot's younger sister, is 33 and works part-time as a wedding planner. She also runs a small Instagram account where she posts photos of venues, dress fittings, flower arrangements. She has a good eye for that kind of thing. Clean aesthetics, soft lighting, everything curated. When Natalie got engaged last year, Evelyn practically turned the wedding into her own personal project. She booked Fairview Country Club for the ceremony and reception, a beautiful venue with tall windows overlooking the golf course and a ballroom big enough for more than 100 guests. The guest list eventually landed around 110 people, 27 of them children. Because of my background with finances and spreadsheets, Evelyn asked if I could help manage the wedding budget. At the time, I thought she was including me. She said I was the most organized person in the family, said it would be easier if one person handled the vendor payments. Silver Oak Events Catering, the florist, the rental company, the venue coordinator named Daniel Reeves, who emailed constantly about deposit deadlines. So I built a spreadsheet. Every vendor, every payment date, every contract clause. It became one more project sitting on my laptop alongside the companies I worked for. I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed organizing the chaos. What I didn't realize is that sometimes being useful isn't the same as being welcome. The Thursday morning before the wedding started like any other. The smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, my laptop open on the counter, Hazel halfway through a bowl of cereal watching a science video on his tablet. Elliot came downstairs dressed earlier than usual. He was pulling on his jacket while scrolling through his phone, that tight look he gets when something unexpected pops up at work. I asked what was going on. He said his mom had been taken to the hospital overnight, something about dizziness, maybe dehydration. He said Natalie had called him early that morning and he needed to go check on her. The words sounded reasonable. Still, something about the way he avoided my eyes made me pause. I offered to come with him. He shook his head almost immediately and said hospitals were chaotic and it would be easier if I stayed home with Hazel. Before I could ask anything else, he kissed Hazel on the head, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. The house felt oddly quiet after he left. Hazel kept eating his cereal, legs swinging under the chair. A minute later, he looked up at me. He asked if he could wear his new vest this weekend. I blinked and asked why. He said for Aunt Natalie's wedding. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. I asked what he meant. Hazel shrugged like it was obvious. He said Dad told Grandma on the phone last night that the wedding was going to be really fancy and that he hoped Hazel wouldn't spill anything on his vest. I felt my stomach tighten, because in the months of planning that wedding, nobody had actually said that Hazel and I were invited. I tried to keep my voice calm and asked what else he heard. Hazel thought for a moment, then he said something that made the room feel suddenly colder. He said that after Dad mentioned the vest, Grandma laughed and said something he didn't understand, and Dad told her not to worry, that Mom didn't need to come, that it would be easier that way. Hazel didn't seem upset when he repeated it. He just said it like a piece of information he'd overheard, but the words hung in the air long after he finished his cereal. I stood there at the kitchen counter, looking at my laptop, where the wedding budget spreadsheet was still open. Vendor payment dates, guest counts, contracts I had carefully organized for a celebration I might not even be welcome to attend. Something inside my chest began to shift. Not panic, not anger, just the quiet realization that something about this entire situation didn't make sense. And for the first time, I started to wonder what exactly Elliot had gone to the hospital for that morning, because suddenly it felt like there was a whole part of this story that nobody had bothered to tell me.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 2. The Video That Changed Everything. Hazel didn't notice the shift in the air. Kids rarely do when the problem belongs to the adults around them. He rinsed his bowl in the sink the way I taught him, left a thin ring of milk around the edge like he always did, and grabbed his backpack from the chair. I helped him zip up his jacket and brushed a crumb of cereal from the front of his shirt. The entire time, my mind kept circling that one sentence he had repeated so casually. Mom doesn't need to come. It'll be easier. Maybe he misunderstood. Maybe Elliot had been talking about something else. Maybe my brain was filling in details that weren't actually there. Toxic families have a strange way of doing that to you. They teach you to question your own instincts first. The drive to Meadow Ridge Elementary only took 7 minutes, but the whole way there I kept glancing at Hazel in the rearview mirror. He was humming quietly while flipping through a comic book. No sign that anything was wrong. The school parking lot was already crowded with parents dropping off their kids. SUVs lined the curb, a crossing guard waved children across the street while the morning bell echoed faintly through the building. Hazel hopped out of the car and swung his backpack over one shoulder. Right before he closed the door, he leaned back in. He asked if he should bring the drawing he made for Aunt Natalie to the wedding or if he should wrap it first. I asked, what drawing? He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his backpack and opened it carefully. It was a picture of a bride and groom standing under a big arch of flowers. Stick figures, but detailed ones. He'd even drawn tiny lights hanging above them. In the corner, he had written Natalie and Ryan in big block letters. I swallowed something tight in my throat and told him we could figure that out later. He nodded like that made perfect sense and ran toward the school doors. I watched him disappear inside before pulling away from the curb. As I drove home, the quiet inside the car felt heavier than usual. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was nothing more than bad communication. I repeated that thought to myself all the way back to the house. When I walked inside, the kitchen looked exactly the same as when Elliot had left earlier. My laptop still sat open on the counter, the wedding spreadsheet glowing on the screen. Rows of vendor names, payment dates, color-coded columns. I closed the spreadsheet and opened the folder where I kept the wedding contracts. Every document was there because I had organized them myself. Silver Oak Events Catering, Fairview Country Club, rental companies for linens and lighting, the photographer contract with Connor Blake, each file neatly labeled. I opened the guest list. It was a simple document Natalie had emailed me weeks earlier so I could confirm the head count for catering. 110 guests, 27 children. I scrolled slowly down the page. The children were listed in a separate section near the bottom, names grouped by family. A few cousins, some of Ryan's nieces and nephews. I read through the list once, then again. Hazel's name wasn't there. At first I thought maybe I missed it. I read every line more carefully. Still nothing. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I reached for my phone. I called Elliot first. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I tried Natalie next. The phone rang once and then the call dropped. Not ignored, rejected. That little difference made my stomach tighten. I stared at the phone screen for a few seconds before dialing Evelyn. Her phone rang longer than the others, but eventually that call went to voicemail too. 3 people, 3 calls, no answers. The kitchen felt unusually quiet again. I set my phone down and leaned against the counter. For a moment, I considered simply waiting until Elliot came home, asking him directly. But something about the way he had rushed out that morning kept bothering me. I picked up my phone again without really thinking about it and opened Instagram. Natalie's account was mostly wedding content lately. Dress fittings, flower arrangements, venue photos. Her newest story showed a table full of champagne glasses and bridesmaids wearing matching silk robes. The next clip showed the ballroom at Fairview Country Club lit with warm string lights. Rehearsal dinner. So Evelyn hadn't been in the hospital. My thumb hovered over the screen before I tapped to the next story. This one had been posted by Connor Blake, the photographer Natalie hired for the wedding. The video was only about 15 seconds long. It showed a small group of people standing near one of the long tables in the ballroom. Soft music played in the background. Glasses clinked as someone laughed off camera. Evelyn stood near the center of the frame, holding a glass of wine. Her posture was straight, shoulders back, the same calm confidence she carried into every room. I watched the clip once. She seemed to be talking to 2 women I recognized from Elliot's extended family. I didn't hear anything clearly the first time. The music was louder than the voices. I almost moved on, but something about the way Evelyn tilted her head while speaking made me pause. I tapped the video again and turned the volume all the way up. The background noise faded enough that the conversation became clearer. One of the women asked where I was. Evelyn smiled politely. Her voice came through the speaker softer but unmistakable. She said that Marina didn't really fit the aesthetic of the wedding. The words felt strange even before I fully processed them. Aesthetic, like the event was a magazine spread instead of a family celebration. One of the women laughed awkwardly and asked about Hazel. Evelyn gave a small shrug. She said he was a sweet boy. Then she added that kids like that make family photos messy. There was a short pause after that. In the background, slightly behind the group, I heard another sound, a quiet laugh. Not loud, not proud, just present. Elliot. My finger froze on the screen. I replayed the video again and again. Each time the same words landed exactly the same way. Sweet boy, messy photos, and Elliot laughing softly somewhere behind the camera without saying a single word to stop it. The refrigerator hummed quietly beside me while I stood there staring at the phone. It took a few seconds before my brain shifted from shock to something more practical. Almost automatically, I set the phone down and reopened the wedding spreadsheet on my laptop. The numbers were still exactly where I had left them earlier that morning. Deposits paid, vendor balances, final payment schedule. My eyes moved to the bottom section where the billing information was listed for each vendor. Silver Oak Events Catering, billing contact, Marina Hale. Fairview Country Club, billing contact, Marina Hale. Lighting Rentals, billing contact, Marina Hale. I opened the full contract with the venue. The document loaded slowly on the screen. Halfway down the first page, under the section labeled Event Billing Details, my name appeared again. Primary billing contact, Marina Hale. Payment account, joint checking ending in 2847. The same account Elliot and I used for our household expenses. The final balance for the wedding was scheduled to be processed in less than 24 hours. I sat there staring at the screen. For months, I had organized every contract for a celebration I thought I was helping create. A wedding with 110 guests, 27 children, and apparently no place for my own son. Outside the kitchen window, a neighbor pushed a lawnmower slowly across his yard. The sound drifted faintly through the glass. Inside the house, everything felt suddenly very still. I looked back at the spreadsheet again, then at the phone, then back at the contracts. And that was the moment when the pieces finally began to fit together in a way that made a terrible kind of sense.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 3. The Quiet Decision. Something inside me settled then, the way dust settles after something heavy hits the ground. Not anger, not yet, just clarity. For a long time, I had told myself that the little comments from Evelyn were harmless, that maybe I was being too sensitive, that families were complicated and sometimes people just said things the wrong way. But standing there in my quiet kitchen, staring at the contracts and the guest list and the empty place where my son's name should have been, I realized something I had avoided admitting for years. Hazel had never really been included. Not fully. Not the way the other kids in the family were. And suddenly all those small memories started sliding into place like puzzle pieces. The afternoon, Evelyn told Hazel to stand behind the taller cousins during a photo. The way she once adjusted a group shot and said gently that children sometimes disrupted the composition. The time Hazel asked why Grandma never used his name when she talked about him. Back then, I told him she was just forgetful. Now I knew that wasn't true. I closed the guest list document slowly and leaned back against the kitchen counter. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Revenge is usually loud in movies. People scream, they confront each other in dramatic scenes, but the moment when I decided what to do was almost completely silent. I opened a new tab on my laptop and logged into our bank account. The screen loaded slowly. checking account balance, mortgage payment scheduled, utility charges, and the wedding budget I had been managing for months. Part of that money came from Elliot's salary, but a large portion of it came from my work. Years of freelance consulting, late nights reviewing financial reports while Hazel slept upstairs, small contracts that slowly built into a cushion of savings. I scrolled through the transaction history. The final vendor payment was scheduled for the next morning. Silver Oak Events Catering, $18,000, for a wedding where my son apparently didn't belong. I sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the keyboard. Then another memory surfaced. 5 years earlier, I had been sitting across from my older brother Noah at a diner in downtown Chicago. We had met for lunch the week before my wedding. Noah worked in IT and had always been the practical one in our family. He had stirred his coffee while studying me carefully. He asked if I had opened a personal account that Elliot couldn't access. I laughed and told him we trusted each other. Noah shrugged. He said trust was great, but independence was better. He told me to keep one account in my own name just in case life ever got complicated. I opened that account a few days later, and I almost never touched it again. Now I clicked into that account for the first time in years. The balance was small compared to our joint account, but it was still active. My cursor hovered over the transfer option. I didn't rush. I simply moved the money. Most of the funds in our joint checking account shifted quietly into my personal account, one number after another. No alarms, no warnings, just a confirmation screen and a small spinning circle while the bank processed the transaction. When it finished, I refreshed the page. The remaining balance in the joint account read $143.82. I stared at the number for a moment. Then I closed the banking window. My heart was beating faster now, but my mind felt strangely calm. The next thing I did surprised even me. I opened a travel website. Flights from Chicago to Orlando. There was a departure that evening from O'Hare. 2 seats left. I clicked them. The hotel search took a little longer. Something simple with a pool. Hazel loved swimming. I booked 2 nights at a hotel near International Drive. When the confirmation email appeared in my inbox, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time all morning, the knot in my chest loosened just a little. I wasn't running away. I was leaving a room where my son had been quietly pushed out. By the time I closed my laptop, it was almost time to pick Hazel up from school. The drive back to Meadow Ridge Elementary felt different than it had that morning. The sky had turned bright and clear. Kids were already spilling out onto the sidewalks when I pulled into the pickup line. Hazel spotted the car and ran toward it, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. He climbed into the passenger seat and immediately started talking about a science experiment they had done with magnets. I listened, nodding, letting his excitement fill the space. Halfway through his story, I told him we were going on an adventure. He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. An adventure? Just the 2 of us. Hazel leaned forward in his seat. He asked where we were going. I told him somewhere warm. He grinned and said that sounded better than math homework. For a while, we just drove. Traffic moved slowly along the suburban streets. Eventually, Hazel grew quiet. I could feel him watching me from the corner of my eye. Finally, he asked the question, "Did Grandma say I shouldn't go to the wedding?" I pulled the car into a small parking lot beside a closed hardware store. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. For a few seconds, I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. Hazel's voice came again, softer this time. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" The question hit me harder than anything else that had happened that day. I turned toward him. Hazel was staring down at his hands, twisting the zipper on his backpack. I reached across the center console and gently lifted his chin so he would look at me. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing." He studied my face carefully, the way kids do when they are trying to decide if an adult is telling the truth. Then he nodded slowly. He asked if we were still going to the wedding. I told him we were going somewhere else instead. Somewhere with a pool. Hazel thought about that for a moment. Then a small smile crept across his face. He said that sounded pretty good. The drive to O'Hare that evening was quiet, but not heavy. Hazel pressed his forehead against the car window while the city skyline appeared in the distance. When we parked in the garage and walked into the airport terminal, his excitement started to return. Airports have that effect on kids. The noise, the rolling suitcases, the giant departure boards flickering with destinations. Hazel asked if we were going somewhere far away. I told him Florida. He actually jumped a little. We ate pretzels near the gate, waiting for the flight to board. Hazel asked if Dad knew where we were going. I told him I would let Dad know we were safe. He seemed satisfied with that answer. When the boarding announcement echoed through the gate area, Hazel grabbed his backpack and followed me down the jet bridge. By the time we were seated on the plane, he had already fallen asleep against the window. His head leaned against the glass, mouth slightly open. I watched him for a while. Then I pulled out my phone. Elliot had called 3 times, Natalie once, Evelyn twice. I opened the message screen and typed slowly. Hazel and I are safe. We're taking a trip. Don't contact me through your mother. I stared at the message for a moment, then pressed send. The plane doors closed a few minutes later, and as the engines began to hum beneath our feet, I realized that somewhere back in Naperville, the wedding I had spent months organizing was about to run into a very unexpected problem.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The Wedding That Couldn't Start. Morning in Orlando arrived with bright sunlight pushing through the thin hotel curtains and the distant sound of children laughing somewhere outside. For a moment, I forgot where we were. Then I rolled over and saw Hazel, already awake, kneeling on the bed near the window with his nose pressed against the glass. The pool. He turned the second he noticed I was awake. "Mom, can we go down there?" His voice was full of that pure excitement only kids have when they realize they're somewhere new. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even 8 yet. I nodded and told him to give me 10 minutes. Hazel was dressed and out the door in about 4. The hotel pool area smelled like chlorine and sunscreen. Palm trees swayed slightly above the lounge chairs while the early Florida sun reflected off the water. Hazel jumped in without hesitation. The splash echoed across the courtyard, and for the first time in 2 days, I felt something inside me loosen. He swam in messy circles, popping up every few seconds to wave at me from the middle of the pool. I sat on the edge with my feet in the water and watched him. Just a kid. Not someone's aesthetic problem. Not someone's photo imbalance. Just my son. After a while, Hazel swam over and asked if he could try diving from the shallow edge. I told him to keep it simple and not break the pool rules. He grinned and paddled away again. That was when I pulled my phone out of my bag. I had turned it to silent the night before. Now, when the screen lit up, the notifications filled almost the entire display. Missed calls, voicemails, messages. The first meme that stood out was Natalie. 6 missed calls, 2 voicemails. I tapped the first voicemail and held the phone to my ear. Natalie's voice came through the speaker shaky and fast. "Marina, what is going on? Daniel just called me. The venue says the final payment didn't go through. They're saying catering can't start service without it. Please call me back." The message ended abruptly. I opened the second voicemail. Natalie sounded closer to panic now. "Marina, this is not funny. The rehearsal dinner already happened, and the wedding is today. The caterer says they're not unloading the trucks until the payment clears. You need to fix this." I lowered the phone slowly. In the pool, Hazel surfaced again and shouted that the water was warm. I waved back. Then another notification appeared. Daniel Reeves, the venue coordinator. I listened to his voicemail next. His tone was calm, but noticeably strained. "Marina, this is Daniel from Fairview Country Club. We attempted to process the final balance this morning and the payment was declined. Silver Oak Events Catering requires confirmation before food service can begin. Please call me as soon as possible." I leaned back against the pool chair. The Florida sun was already warm on my shoulders. Somewhere thousands of miles away, a wedding day was beginning, and it had a problem. My phone buzzed again. Elliot.
I let it ring. Hazel swam over and grabbed the edge of the pool. He asked if we could get pancakes later. I told him we absolutely could. He smiled and launched himself back into the water. Meanwhile, my phone kept lighting up. Call from Elliot, call from Natalie, call from Evelyn. I ignored them all. A few minutes later, a text from Elliot appeared. "Where are you?" Another message followed almost immediately. "What did you do?" I stared at the words for a moment, but didn't respond. Instead, I opened the banking app again. The transfer from the day before was still exactly where I left it. The joint account balance still read $143.82. I closed the app and slipped the phone back into my bag. For the next hour, I stayed at the pool with Hazel. We ordered breakfast from the hotel cafe and ate it at a table near the water. Hazel talked about how big the pool felt compared to the one at home. He asked if we could stay another day. I told him we would see. But while we sat there, my phone continued buzzing. Back in Illinois, the wedding day had officially started. Later that morning, curiosity finally got the better of me. Hazel had gone back upstairs to change clothes when I checked my phone again. More voicemails. One from Elliot. I played it. His voice sounded tight, like he was trying to stay calm. "Marina, you need to call me right now. The venue says the payment bounced. Natalie's losing it, and Mom is screaming at the coordinator. Just call me." I imagined the ballroom at Fairview Country Club. The tall windows overlooking the golf course, white tablecloths, floral arrangements Evelyn probably spent weeks perfecting. 110 guests, 27 children, and no food. I listened to another voicemail from Natalie. This one sounded worse. "Marina, they won't start service. The caterer trucks are literally sitting outside. Daniel says the contract requires full payment before they bring everything inside." Her voice cracked. "This is my wedding day." I closed the voicemail and slipped the phone back into my pocket. A strange calm settled over me. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply stepped away. Back in Naperville, the situation inside Fairview Country Club was getting worse. I would hear about it later from multiple people, but the picture formed clearly enough. Guests had already arrived for the ceremony. People filled the ballroom waiting area. Children ran between tables while servers stood nearby unsure what to do. Silver Oak Events Catering had delivered their trucks, but the staff refused to begin unloading. Daniel Reeves stood near the front desk with a clipboard and a phone pressed to his ear. Across the room, Evelyn Grant was arguing loudly with him. "I told you the payment was handled." Daniel remained polite but firm. "Mrs. Grant, the account declined the transaction. Until we receive confirmation, the kitchen cannot begin service." Natalie was in a separate room with the bridesmaids. Her makeup artist tried to fix mascara that kept smearing every time she cried. Meanwhile, guests had started whispering. One of Elliot's cousins asked where Hazel was. Another relative mentioned that most weddings with kids usually had them sitting near the front tables. Someone else pointed out that 27 children were listed on the catering counts, but Elliot's son wasn't anywhere in the building. The questions spread quietly through the crowd. Connor Blake, the photographer, continued moving through the room capturing images of the ceremony preparations, but even he couldn't hide the tension building in the background. Servers stood near empty buffet tables. Guests checked their watches. Outside the venue, catering trucks remained closed. At one point, Daniel walked over to Elliot. His voice stayed professional. "We need payment confirmation within the hour, or Silver Oak will pull their staff." Elliot rubbed a hand across his face. He pulled out his phone again and called me. When I didn't answer, he tried texting. Then he tried again and again. Back at the hotel, Hazel came downstairs wearing a new t-shirt he had begged me to buy at the gift shop. He asked if we could visit a theme park later. I told him we might tomorrow. His smile was so wide it made my chest ache. Another call from Elliot lit up my phone. This time I answered. The moment I said hello, he started talking. "Marina, what is happening with the account?" His voice was low but strained. I could hear voices in the background.
Natalie crying, someone arguing. I asked him a simple question. Did Mom tell you Hazel would ruin the family photos? There was a long pause. Then Elliot sighed. This isn't the time for this. I looked across the pool where Hazel was trying to balance on the edge of the water. It actually is. More silence. Finally, Elliot spoke again, quieter this time. You moved the money. Yes. Another long pause. Then he said something that told me he had finally understood the situation. You didn't ruin the wedding. He sounded almost stunned. You just stopped paying for it. I didn't answer. On the other end of the phone, I could hear Evelyn's voice rising somewhere in the background as the reality of the situation slowly settled over the entire ballroom. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 5. The Truth Elliot Couldn't Hide. The shouting on Elliot's side of the phone faded for a moment, as if he had stepped farther away from the ballroom doors. I could hear wind now and the faint hum of cars passing on the road near the country club. When he spoke again, his voice sounded drained. Marina. I didn't answer right away. Hazel was still splashing in the pool a few yards away, trying to balance on the edge like a tightrope walker. Elliot continued. Can you just tell me what you want right now? The question hung in the air. For years, I had tried to answer that question quietly without anyone asking it. I wanted respect. I wanted my son treated like he belonged. I wanted my husband to notice when someone spoke about Hazel like he was an inconvenience. But in that moment, none of those things mattered anymore. I want the truth, I said. He was silent again. Behind him, I could still hear muffled voices from the building, someone calling his name, someone else asking about the caterers. Finally, he spoke. Dad didn't want Hazel there. The words came out flat, like something he had been rehearsing in his head for hours. I stared out at the water. Hazel had found a floating foam noodle and was pretending it was a sword. Why? Another pause. I thought it would avoid drama. That answer almost made me laugh. 27 kids are at that wedding. I know. So Hazel wasn't the problem. He didn't argue. The truth was already standing between us. After a moment, I asked the question that had been circling in my head since I heard Evelyn's voice on that Instagram story. Did you tell her she couldn't talk about our son that way? The silence this time was long enough that I could hear my own breathing. When Elliot finally spoke, his voice had dropped lower. No. He swallowed audibly before continuing. She said Hazel would make the family photos look wrong. The word wrong landed heavier when he said it out loud. I closed my eyes briefly. The image of that rehearsal dinner video flashed in my mind again. Evelyn holding a glass of wine, smiling while she dismissed my child like a smudge on a camera lens. Across the pool, Hazel shouted that he almost fell in. I waved to show I was watching. Elliot spoke again. I didn't think she meant it the way it sounded. You laughed, I said quietly. Another pause. I know. The exhaustion in his voice was real now. Back in Naperville, the rest of the story was already spreading through the extended Grant family. Fairview Country Club might have finally served dinner that night after Elliot's father, Thomas, arranged an emergency transfer from another account. But the delay had left the entire room buzzing. People remember chaos better than they remember ceremonies. Margaret Doyle had apparently been sitting near the back of the ballroom when the argument between Evelyn and the venue coordinator reached its peak. Margaret loved two things in life: gardening and gossip. By the next morning, she had already called 3 different cousins to describe the scene in dramatic detail. According to Margaret, the caterers had stood with their arms folded, while guests whispered at the tables. Natalie had cried in the bridal suite. Evelyn had demanded to speak to the venue manager. And somewhere in the middle of all that, someone asked why Elliot's son wasn't there when so many other children were. Questions like that travel fast through a family. By the time Elliot left the venue that night, half the extended relatives already had their own version of the story. Some blamed the caterer, some blamed Natalie's planning, but Evelyn blamed me. Elliot told me she had spent most of the evening telling anyone who would listen that I had stolen money from the family account and disappeared out of spite. That accusation sounded dramatic enough that I almost admired it, but dramatic accusations usually collapse once they meet basic facts. The next morning in Orlando, I scheduled a consultation call with Claire Bennett. Claire was a family attorney based in downtown Naperville, and someone a client of mine had recommended years earlier. Her office sounded quiet when she answered. After I explained the situation, she asked a few careful questions. Was the checking account jointly owned? Yes. Did you transfer the money into an account in your own name? Yes. Did you spend any of the funds on something illegal? No. She paused briefly. Then her tone shifted slightly into something more reassuring. Moving money from a joint account into another account in your own name isn't automatically a crime, especially when the funds include income you earned. I leaned back in the hotel chair as she continued explaining. If Elliot wanted to challenge the transfer, he could do so through civil court as part of a financial dispute. But it wasn't theft. That meant Evelyn's dramatic accusations had nowhere to go legally. When I ended that call, the knot in my stomach loosened a little more. A few days later, Hazel and I flew back to Illinois. Naperville looked exactly the same when we pulled into our neighborhood. Kids riding bikes, dogs barking behind fences. Nothing about the streets suggested a family argument had quietly reshaped my entire life. Hazel went back to school that Monday. When I picked him up in the afternoon, his teacher, Rachel Ortiz, stopped me near the classroom door. Rachel was in her mid-30s with a calm voice that made kids trust her instantly. She smiled politely. Hazel told the class he was going to his aunt's wedding last week. I felt my shoulders tighten slightly. He seemed really excited about it. Hazel stood beside me, looking down at the floor. Rachel glanced between us. I hope everything went well. I nodded politely and said it had been complicated. Rachel didn't push further, but I saw the moment when she looked down at Hazel and realized he hadn't actually gone. On the drive home, Hazel was quieter than usual. When we pulled into the driveway, Elliot was already standing outside. He had come over to talk. Hazel climbed out of the car slowly. For a moment, the three of us stood there in the driveway, the evening light stretching long shadows across the pavement. Elliot crouched down to Hazel's level. "Hey, buddy." Hazel nodded. Elliot looked nervous in a way I had never seen before. Hazel studied his face carefully. Then he asked the question that had been building since the rehearsal dinner none of us attended. Why didn't I get to go to the wedding? Elliot glanced towards me briefly. I didn't move. Hazel waited patiently. Kids have a way of sitting with uncomfortable silence that adults try to escape. Elliot finally answered. Grandma said something she shouldn't have.
Chapter 6. Where My Son Actually Belongs. The air in the driveway felt heavier after Hazel asked that question. Elliot looked like someone had taken the ground out from under him. He opened his mouth once as if he was about to answer, then stopped. His eyes moved briefly toward the house behind us, and then back to Hazel. For the first time since all of this started, he didn't try to soften the moment. "I should have," he said quietly. Hazel watched him carefully. Kids notice when adults finally stop hiding behind excuses. Elliot continued, his voice unsteady but honest. "I should have told her to stop, and I didn't." Hazel didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he nodded once. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to understanding. He picked up his backpack and walked toward the front door. "I'm going to finish my homework," he said. The door closed softly behind him. Elliot stayed in the driveway with me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't think it would go this far." I crossed my arms. It already had. He didn't argue with that. The next week moved slowly. Elliot called several times, sometimes to talk about Hazel, sometimes just to sit in silence on the phone like two people trying to figure out what shape their life was supposed to take next. We both knew the problem wasn't just the wedding.
It was the years of quiet things that had come before it. About a week after we got back from Orlando, Elliot asked if he could come by the house to talk in person. I told him he could. When he arrived that evening, Hazel was in the living room building something complicated out of Legos. Elliot stepped inside cautiously, like he wasn't sure he still belonged there. He knelt down beside Hazel. "Hey, buddy." Hazel looked up briefly. "Hi." The conversation between them was small at first. Soccer practice, homework, a funny story about a kid in Hazel's class who accidentally spilled paint on his shoes. But there was something different about Elliot now. He listened more carefully. After Hazel went upstairs to shower, Elliot and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had organized the wedding spreadsheets weeks earlier. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I started seeing someone. I raised an eyebrow. A therapist. That surprised me more than anything else he had said. He nodded. I realized I don't really know how to stand up to my mother. The honesty in his voice felt unfamiliar. I should have learned that a long time ago. We talked for almost an hour, not about blame, not about the wedding, just about what came next. Over the next few months, things slowly shifted. Elliot continued therapy. We worked with a mediator to figure out a routine that kept Hazel's life stable. Eventually, I moved into a small apartment closer to Meadow Ridge Elementary. It wasn't far from the house, but it felt like a different beginning. Hazel decorated his new room with soccer posters and glow-in-the-dark stars. He liked that the park was within walking distance. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. Meanwhile, the story of the wedding never completely disappeared from the extended Grant family. Margaret Doyle told her version of it at least 3 different family gatherings. In her version, the caterers refused to open the trucks, the guests waited awkwardly for nearly an hour, and Evelyn argued with the venue coordinator so loudly that half the ballroom could hear it. Some relatives quietly stopped taking Evelyn's side. Others simply avoided the topic altogether. But the one thing everyone knew was that the story didn't match the version Evelyn had tried to spread. And over time, her certainty about being right started to look less convincing. One evening, several months later, Hazel and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie. The apartment lights were dim, and the only sound in the room was the quiet dialogue from the television. Hazel leaned against my shoulder. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he shifted slightly and asked something so softly I almost didn't catch it. "Mom?" I looked down at him. "Yeah?" He hesitated before asking the question. "Do I belong with you?" The words hit deeper than anything that had happened during the wedding. I wrapped my arm around him and pulled him closer. "You always belong with me." He studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had been wondering for a long time. Outside the apartment window, the evening air was calm. A few cars passed along the street below. Somewhere nearby, someone was walking a dog. Life looked normal again. But inside, I knew something important had changed. Evelyn once said Hazel didn't belong in her idea of the family. For a long time, I thought that meant something was wrong with us. Now I understood it differently. Hazel doesn't belong in places where love depends on appearances. He doesn't belong in rooms where children are treated like props in someone else's perfect picture. He belongs where he is protected, where he is wanted exactly as he is. And for me, that realization changed everything. So I'm curious what you think. If you had been standing where I stood that week, knowing what was said about your child and watching the rest of the family pretend it was normal, would you have handled it differently? Would you have stayed and tried to keep the peace? Or would you have walked away the way I did? Let me know what you would have done.